They say Daniel Carter was never one for caution. He loved pushing limits, hiking the deepest woods, exploring old abandoned houses. To him, every dark alley and forgotten place was a thrill, a challenge. But I never thought his curiosity would be the end of him. It was a few weeks ago when Daniel told me about the old railroad tunnel outside of town. Not many people knew it existed. Those who did either avoided it or acted like it was just some local legend. But Daniel had done his research. This tunnel was abandoned in the 50s after a bunch of workers vanished during construction, he explained, his eyes gleaming with excitement. No bodies, no signs of struggle. The company sealed it off, but some people say it was never meant to be reopened. Weird, right? Weird didn't even cover it. There were stories about voices in the tunnel, shadows that moved when no one was there, and people who entered but never came out. Locals claimed it was haunted, cursed by something ancient that lived beneath the earth, something that didn't like to be disturbed. But Daniel, like always, scoffed at the rumors. It's just a tunnel, he had said, brushing it off. Let's go check it out. I wish I had said no. The day we went was overcast, a heavy fog hanging low in the air. The entrance to the tunnel was hidden behind thick overgrowth, almost like it didn't want to be found. As we cut through the branches and vines, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The closer we got to the entrance, the more I wanted to turn around. Daniel, though, was practically buzzing with excitement. The tunnel mouth was massive, a gaping black void that seemed to swallow all light. Graffiti covered the walls near the entrance, but after a few feet, the markings faded into darkness. Look at this, Daniel whispered, pointing to a rusty metal sign, half buried in dirt. The words were barely legible, but you could make out warnings about unstable ground, danger, and faintly, the word missing, scratched into the metal. We stepped inside, our footsteps echoing off the stone walls, the sound unnervingly hollow. The air grew colder with every step, and soon I could see my breath misting in front of me. Daniel had brought a flashlight, but its beam seemed weaker than it should have been, like the darkness was absorbing it. Why does it smell like that? I asked, noticing the thick, musty odor clinging to the air. It was something rotten, almost sweet, like decay left to fester in a damp place for too long. Probably just animals, Daniel said, though he didn't sound as sure as he usually did. The deeper we walked, the more the world seemed to shift. The tunnel was supposed to be straight, but it felt like we were descending into something far below the surface. There was a pressure building in the air, a heaviness that made it hard to breathe. My skin prickled with every step like I was being watched. Do you hear that? Daniel whispered. His voice sounded far away even though he was right next to me. And that's when I heard it, a faint whisper, so quiet it could have been mistaken for the wind. But it wasn't. It was too deliberate, too rhythmic, like someone was speaking just on the edge of hearing. We should go, I said, my voice tight. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but Daniel just shook his head, his eyes locked ahead. Just a little farther. I want to see where it goes. I wish I had stopped him. It must have been around the halfway point when things changed. I don't know how to explain it, but the darkness in the tunnel wasn't normal. It was thick, almost alive, swallowing the weak beam of our flashlight like it was nothing. And then there was the noise, a low rumbling hum that came from nowhere. Daniel stopped, tilting his head like he was trying to listen for something. Do you hear that? He whispered. But before I could answer, he took a step forward, then another. I stayed back, feeling like something was wrong, like something was watching us. Suddenly, Daniel turned around to face me. His face was pale, his eyes wide. I think I saw someone, he muttered, pointing into the darkness. I followed his gaze, but there was nothing, just endless black. Come on, let's go, I urged him, feeling the rising panic gnaw at me. But Daniel shook his head. Wait, I need to see. He took off into the dark, faster than I could react. I shouted his name, sprinting after him, but he was already out of sight. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into total darkness. I stood there, calling for him, my voice echoing uselessly through the tunnel. Then, for a moment, I saw him. Daniel was standing at the far end of the tunnel, his back to me. But something was wrong. He wasn't moving. The shadows seemed to curl around him, almost like they were holding him in place. "Daniel!" I screamed, my legs feeling like they were frozen in place. He turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see his eyes. Blank, hollow, as if all life had drained from them. And then, he vanished. Not like he ran or disappeared in the darkness. He simply blinked out of existence. 1 second he was there, the next, he wasn't. I ran out of that tunnel, heart pounding, and having gone bad 6. No one believes me. They found me 3 days later, wandering in a daze near the tunnel's entrance, my clothes torn and covered in dirt. Blood. Daniel's blood. I don't remember any of it. They think I had something to do with his disappearance, that maybe we got into a fight. They've questioned me over and over, accusing eyes drilling into me, hoping I'll crack, confess to something I didn't do. But I didn't do anything, I swear. The worst part is, they never found his body. No trace of him, except for some blood near the mouth of the tunnel. It's like he just evaporated. The police have stopped searching, and the whole town whispers behind my back. They think I'm guilty, but they don't understand. I've tried to go back to find him, to see if there's some way to bring him back, but I can't. Every time I get close, I feel that same pull, the heavy darkness waiting in the tunnel. And I know it's still there. Whatever took Daniel, it's waiting, watching. One day, it'll take me too. But until then, I'm stuck, living with the looks, the questions, the whispers. Everyone thinks I'm a killer. But I know the truth. Daniel didn't leave. He's still in that tunnel, trapped in the dark. And I think whatever took him is getting hungrier. Nathan Jensen was a wanderer by nature. At 24, he'd hiked most of the national parks, disappearing for weeks at a time, only to return with tales of remote trails, rugged landscapes, and solitude. He was tall and lean, with a weathered look that came from years spent outdoors. His scruffy brown beard and tousled hair gave him the appearance of someone far older than his years. But now, Nathan had been missing for 3 days. When his family hadn't heard from him after a weekend trip to Black Pine Forest, they knew something was wrong. This wasn't the first person to go missing in Black Pine, but Nathan was experienced. If anyone could survive, it was him, or so we thought. We were a team of 5 called in to comb through the last known stretch of wilderness where Nathan had hiked. Black Pine Forest had a reputation, the kind of place local kids told stories about around campfires, but those were just stories, right? We'd been briefed on his route, his last GPS being near the summit, and his intention to camp overnight. As we pushed deeper into the forest, the sunlight began to fade, and a sense of unease settled over us like a fog. It was late in the afternoon when we found the cabin. It was buried beneath thick vines, the wood blackened and decaying from years of neglect. No map marked its presence. No records suggested it had ever been built. It just sat there, waiting, like it had been part of the forest for centuries. The place looked ready to collapse, the door hanging loosely on rusted hinges. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp wood and rot, and the darkness seemed to press against us. Dust clung to every surface, and long-forgotten tools lined the walls, rusting and decayed. Nathan's backpack was the first thing we saw, sitting in the corner near the fireplace. His tent was draped haphazardly over a broken window, its fabric torn and dirty. "Why would he set camp up in here?" Officer Garrett asked, eyeing the ruins around us. It didn't make sense. Nathan was methodical, always careful. This place wasn't shelter. It was a tomb. I walked over to his pack, checking the contents. His gear was all intact, the sleeping bag rolled up neatly. His water bottle was still full. Whatever had happened, Nathan hadn't planned on staying long. "What the hell happened here?" Officer Dawson muttered, his voice low, his eyes scanning the shadows. There was no signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken furniture. It was as if he had simply walked into the cabin and disappeared. But then I found his journal, lying open on the table. The last few entries were scrawled in hurried, shaky handwriting. "Something is watching me. It's been following me for hours, keeping its distance. I can't get a good look at it. I thought it was a deer, but I don't know. There's a cabin ahead. I'll take shelter there tonight. I don't like how the woods feel anymore. I keep hearing whispers in the trees." A cold chill crept down my spine as I read those words. Whatever Nathan had seen, it wasn't an animal. Something had driven him to this place, something he was running from. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cabin floor. We decided to search the surrounding area while we still had some light, but something strange happened. No matter how far we walked, no matter which direction we chose, we kept ending up back at the cabin. "Are we walking in circles?" Hayes asked, his voice edged with panic. "No," I replied, but my words felt hollow. We'd been moving in straight lines, and yet every path brought us back to the same rotting walls, the same sagging roof. It was as if the forest itself was turning us around. Night was closing in fast, and we knew we couldn't stay out in the open. Reluctantly, we returned to the cabin, locking the door behind us. The oppressive silence inside felt thicker now, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. We gathered in the center of the room, our flashlights casting long, flickering shadows against the decaying wood. Outside, the wind had died down, replaced by a low, rhythmic hum, almost like breathing. It seemed to come from all around us, vibrating through the floor, the walls, the very air we breathed. "Did you hear that?" Garrett whispered, his eyes wide with fear. We all heard it. The sound wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something else, something far older than the forest itself. Then we saw it. Through the cracked window, a figure moved in the fog. At first it looked like a man, but as it came closer, its proportions were all wrong. Its limbs were too long, its movements too fluid. The skin stretched tight over its bony frame, pale and slick, almost translucent. Its eyes, or the hollow places where eyes should have been, gleamed in the darkness, locking onto us. "That's no person," Dawson muttered, stepping back. The creature's long, spindly fingers curled around the edges of the window, and it pulled itself closer, its face pressed against the glass. There was no mouth, no nose, just that endless gaze watching us. "We need to move," Hayes whispered, his voice trembling. Suddenly the door shook, rattling in its frame as if something outside was testing it, pressing against it. We backed away, weapons drawn, but I knew they wouldn't help. The creature didn't need to break in. It was already inside. The walls, the floor, the very air we breathed, everything felt alive, thrumming with the same rhythmic pulse. And then the cabin began to bend. The walls seemed to close in, warping and twisting as though the building itself was alive, reshaping us, to trap us. The windows darkened, the light fading completely, leaving us in a suffocating blackness. Garrett screamed as something cold brushed against him, pulling him toward the window. We grabbed him, pulling him back, but it was like fighting against a force we couldn't see. The creature was inside, its presence wrapping around us, constricting like a living nightmare. I turned toward the door, but it was gone. The cabin had shifted, trapping us in a space that no longer obeyed the laws of the world outside. The shadows moved, flickering, growing, swallowing us one by one. Dawson stumbled backward, his flashlight flickering as he shone it toward the ceiling. There, above us, the creature loomed, its limbs stretching down from the darkness, pulling at the walls, bending reality. It wasn't just one thing, it was many. It was the cabin, the forest, the very essence of this cursed place. "Run!" someone shouted, though there was nowhere to go. The walls closed in, the ceiling dropping, and the creature descended, its hollow eyes fixed on us with cold, infinite hunger. We fought to escape, but the cabin itself twisted against us. The door gone, the windows sealed shut. I felt something cold wrap around my ankle, pulling me toward the floor. I looked back, and through the cracks in the wood, I saw the ground shift. It wasn't dirt. It was alive, writhing and pulsing with the same unearthly energy. Garrett was the first to go. One moment he was beside us, the next he was gone, dragged into the darkness without a sound. Then Dawson. Then Hayes. I ran toward the wall, slamming against it, desperate for any way out. The creature's gaze never left me, its hollowed eyes boring into my soul. And then, nothing. I woke up at dawn, lying just outside the cabin. The others were gone. Nathan was gone. The forest was still, and the sun was shining as though nothing had happened. But I knew better. Black Pine Forest doesn't let you go. Not completely. It watches, it waits, and when it's ready, it takes. I've lived on Hollow Street for over 30 years. In all that time, nothing has unsettled me more than the house next door. It's an old Victorian. Its sagging roof and peeling paint giving it the look of something forgotten. Except it's not. It draws people in, and then it swallows them whole. I didn't think much of it at first. People come and go all the time. But the house, something's wrong with it. Over the years, I've seen 3 families move in, full of life and energy, only to vanish within a month. They leave behind everything, their cars, their furniture, their clothes. It's as if they were there one minute and gone the next. The police always say they left on their own, but I know better. I've seen things. I've seen them acting strange before they disappear. The first family was the Thompsons. That was back in '98. Nice folks. Jack, his wife Emily, and their teenage daughter. Jack was a school teacher, and Emily worked at the library. They moved in during the fall. At first, everything seemed normal. We'd chat sometimes over the fence, talk about the neighborhood, the weather, whatever came to mind. But then, about 2 weeks in, Jack stopped coming outside. I remember one night, I was out front watering the lawn when I saw him standing in the window, just standing there, staring out at nothing. I waved, but he didn't respond. I figured maybe he was just tired. We all get tired, right? But over the next few days, I noticed his wife doing the same thing, just staring out the front window, pale as a ghost. No lights on in the house, no movement, just the 2 of them standing there at different times, looking out like they were waiting for something. Then one morning, I realized I hadn't seen them for days. No one was out in the yard, and the house was silent. Their cars were still in the driveway, the lights off. A week later, the police showed up. Apparently a relative had called saying they hadn't heard from the Thompsons in days. When the cops went inside, they found the house just as it had been. The Thompsons' shoes were still by the door, dinner plates still on the table, but the family? Gone. No trace. Not a thing out of place. Just empty. After that, the house sat vacant for a few years. I didn't mind the quiet, honestly, but eventually someone else moved in. The Diaz family in 2003. Young couple with twin boys, about 6 years old. They were always outside, the boys running around, playing with sticks, making up games. I liked them, good kids. Their parents, Sophia and Luis, seemed nice too. For the first couple of weeks, it was like nothing had happened. But soon enough, it started again. I'd be out on my porch in the evening having a smoke, and I'd see Sophia just standing in the yard, staring at the house, same as the Thompsons had. Not at the window this time, but at the front door, like something inside had caught her attention and wouldn't let go. It was unsettling, to say the least. I remember the last time I saw her. It was late, maybe around midnight. I heard something outside like a door creaking, and when I looked out my window, there she was, barefoot, standing in the middle of the yard, looking up at the second floor window. I watched her for almost an hour. She didn't move. Then one night, there was a knock on my door. It was late, well past midnight. I opened it to find Luis Diaz standing there, looking haggard and pale. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his eyes wide, darting around as if he was being chased. "Luis, are you all right?" I asked, stepping back to let him in. He stood there on my porch, trembling. "I need help. Something's wrong in that house," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "There's something in there. I can't explain it. My wife, she's been..." He broke off, glancing nervously back toward his house. His whole body was shaking by now. "Come in," I said, opening the door wider. "We can call someone. We can..." "No," he interrupted, his voice rising to a panicked shout. "No, you don't understand. No one can help. I shouldn't have come." He stepped back, shaking his head. "I can't be here. It knows." "Luis, wait, what knows? What are you talking about?" I reached out to him, but he flinched away like I was burning him. "I'm sorry," he muttered, backing down the steps. "I shouldn't have come." Before I could say anything else, he turned and ran. I watched him disappear into the night, back toward his house. I never saw him again after that. The next morning, I went over to check on them, knocked on the door. No answer. The twins' bikes were still leaning against the porch, and their car was in the driveway, but no one came to the door. A week later, the police were back. Same story. The Diaz family was gone, just like the Thompsons. They left everything behind, keys still on the hook, breakfast still on the counter. It was like they had simply stopped existing. The last family to move in was the Martins in 2010. This time, I knew something was wrong from the start. They seemed normal enough at first, Richard, his wife Hannah, and their baby girl. But after a couple of weeks, Richard started spending all his time in the backyard, digging. He didn't say much, just kept digging holes, like he was looking for something. Sometimes I'd hear him muttering to himself. I asked him one day what he was doing, and he just looked at me with these dead eyes and said, "It's under there. We have to find it." I didn't know what he was talking about, but I didn't press him. A week later, Hannah stopped coming outside altogether. I'd see her through the window sometimes, holding the baby, her face pressed against the glass. She looked terrified. Then one night, the house was completely dark, and I knew. I just knew. I didn't even bother calling the police this time. I knew what they'd find. The Martins were gone too. Every time it's the same thing. The families disappear, their things are left behind, and no one can explain it. The police say people leave all the time, start over somewhere new. But how do you start over without your shoes, without your keys, without your baby's toys? I've seen them right before they go. Something changes in them. They start acting strange, like the house is getting inside their heads, twisting them. I don't know what it is, but I can feel it sometimes, even from here. It's empty again now, but I know it won't be for long. Someone always moves in thinking they found a good deal, a quiet place to start fresh. But they don't know. They don't know what I've seen. And one day, they'll disappear too.